Welcome to Business 7. Of course, this week saw the tabling of the mid-year budget review, and we will be focusing on dissecting what Finance Minister Iipumbu Shiimi said in this budget. On the front page of Business 7 this week, an article about Dr. Frans Cronje. He is a political analyst and well-known strategist based in South Africa. Now, Cronje believes that Namibia, when one looks at its geopolitical... Oh, hier, ek is jammer, Gabby. Dit was gister budget, vergewe my. Let's look at the front page of Business 7. It's all about Dr. Frans Cronje's view on how important Namibia's geographical location is, and how this can be strategically exploited to put the country on the path to economic growth. On page 2, we look at the IPPR lobbying for cash grants to bring relief to consumers that are the most vulnerable, especially when it comes to basic foodstuffs, and an analysis about Namibia, wheat imports, and its relation to the invasion of Russia into the Ukraine. On page 3, good news, we also saw it in the mid-year budget review, mining tax that really boost the fiscus, and an analysis there on how mining has been doing year to date.
Connection. It's in the human touch, the feeling of belonging. It inspires us and empowers us, creates clarity from complexity. It starts new conversations, unlocks the power of advice, and makes an impact on your life. At Alex Forbes, we pioneer insight to provide you with advice that connects your decisions of today to your impact tomorrow.
There's no doubt that Finance Minister Iipumbu Shiimi's mid-year budget review doesn't make for very interesting reading. But here to connect the dots is the economist of Cirrus Capital, Robert McGregor. Good morning to Cirrus Capital economist, Robert McGregor. Welcome to the program. Robert, let's immediately start. First impressions of the mid-year budget review.
Initially, the numbers looked incredibly good. The more we delved into them, the numbers seemed almost a bit too good to be true. And quite frankly, I struggled to make sense of all of the numbers together. The revenue forecasts are incredibly optimistic, very, very bullish. We're seeing massive increases in revenue from most sources over the next few years, according to these forecasts, and some very surprising fiscal restraint in the outer years, which is leading to incredibly low deficits, running a primary surplus from next year onwards. These are very optimistic numbers, and at this stage, I don't think that they're quite realistic, particularly given that in prior years, we've seen similar narratives where sort of the expenditure outlook is kept flat in the later years, and the revenue outlook is increased massively, and those often have not materialized, which have led to larger than expected deficits once those years arrive.
Robert, the revenue expenditure just for this year, in terms of tax, came in very high. Why is that?
So we saw revenue increased by 4.4 billion for this year, which is a very positive move, and it's good to see. The reasons driven for that are largely linked to domestic revenue sources. So we were told that we saw better than expected personal income tax collections. We're quite surprised. Personal income tax has been very, very resilient the last 5 or 6 years, given the weak economic backdrop, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact the lockdowns had on employment. So that's been quite surprising. And then we've also seen it on the tax side, on the company tax side rather, so non-mining companies, and then that's not that surprising. We've seen a lot of, for instance, listed companies reporting much better results for the year so far. And so that's quite positive note. And then a lot of it is linked to the mining sector. So for instance, improved mining royalty is from diamonds in particular, as well as increased revenues and therefore profits as well from many of the mining companies, again, largely linked to Namibia, given the new vessel that's joined, as well as the higher diamond prices they're fetching this year and the weaker rand.
Coming back to some of the announcements in the budget, relief in terms of social grants, etc. What do you make of that?
I think it's quite good to see that there is some attention given to the social aspects. You know, the social safety net in Namibia, I think, has been relatively successful. We've seen the impact of many of these grants has been very, very positive for low-income households. They've helped draw particularly young people, children, as well as the elderly, out of poverty or kept them out of poverty. And so, you know, these moves are quite welcome. If we look at the overall numbers that sort of these increases to the various grants are causing on the budget, they're actually relatively small. I mean, in totality, we're not seeing a massive increase. We're seeing more allocations to other votes. We see, you know, more being spent on defense, or more being reallocated to defense at times than what these account for. So we think, you know, at this stage that the moves are relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but they have a much wider and much more positive impact.
Yes, very interesting. It's always in the devil lies in the details. The announcement of 5.2 million increase in the conditional grant, and yet if you look at the documents, Defence gets 33 million for their research and development project, which of course is classified. Never mind. Robert, there were also some promises made for the next couple of years in terms of old age pension, etc. How likely are those to materialize?
Yes, so while we did see an increase in one of the grants specifically targeted for this year, so taking effect soon, and that relates to those benefiting from the feeding schemes. What we have seen is most of the grants, so the child disability grant, the old age grant, and similar, those changes, while announced now, will only take effect next year, so they won't actually be impacting this year's budget.
Among other things, can this budget be viewed as an election budget? We spoke to Robert McGregor, economist at Cirrus Capital, about that. Coming to the tax reforms, or the suggested ones, some good news there, and once again, commitments going forward, or suggestions of commitments going forward.
Yes, so I think the one sort of big positive to take away is that for once we aren't seeing really negative tax reforms being sort of floated in the budget document, and that's quite positive. I think we're quite wary of you know, this sort of effort to try and get a feel for policy by announcing it, and that obviously can have very negative reactions. It's also very positive in our view to see that government is acknowledging that we actually need some revenue side reforms. In reducing the tax burden, we see for low-income households are wanting to push up the threshold for personal income tax to 100,000, and then also the sort of commitment to reducing the corporate tax rate. However, that's sort of 2 and 3 years out, and it's by 1 percentage point each year. So eventually taking it down from the current 32% for non-mining companies to 30% in 2025. And these are positive signals, and it's good to see that you know, we're actually talking about this and looking at doing it. The concern is just that, firstly, you know, these reforms are still at least several years out at best. You know, they're not guaranteed at this stage. You know, we could see, you know, political attitudes towards this change over the next 2-3 years quite easily, especially if revenue forecasts aren't being met. And then also on the other side, the changes are relatively small. If we look at the forecasts, these decreases, for instance, in the corporate tax rate, I assume would be included in the company tax forecast, and they don't really seem to be having much of an impact. So that begs the question, why not move it forward and why not make it larger?
Robert, coming to expenditure, a little bit of comment on the operational budget and also on the development budget, please.
Well, what's good to see for once is that we aren't seeing massive reallocations away from the development budget towards operational expenditure. And so that's a very, very welcome change from what we've seen for many years now. And the concern is often your development expenditure tends to be your more productive expenditure, long-term macroeconomic benefits, whereas the operational expenditure tends to be rather unproductive, especially since most of it goes towards the wage bill. We do have that 1.3% increase in the wage bill for this year, which is now being accounted for, and it's good to see that. I mean, the revenue growth for this year much larger than the expenditure growth, although it's only seen about a $500 million reduction in the deficit. But the challenge with a lot of the operational expenditure is that it is very sticky, especially when it comes to the wage bill. So yes, we only have a 1.3% wage bill increase for this year, but it's important to remember that also increases the wage bill for next year and the following years by 1.3% compared to prior forecasts as well.
A question a lot of people will obviously ask is to which extent this budget was an election budget?
Well, I mean, when I think of an election budget, I think of, far more fiscal expansion than what we're seeing here. From these numbers, we're actually seeing fiscal restraint out towards the election years. So not that much of an election budget. Yes, we are seeing sort of, these increases in social grants. I think, that is something that we see quite often. And given the relatively low inflation of the prior years and the higher inflation we're seeing now, that is warranted to a large extent. So not so much an election budget in that view. It is a budget that does paint, in my view, the more optimistic outlook for the government's finances over the next couple of years, and we're worried that won't exactly materialize, which is a particular concern, especially if we look at sort of the much smaller deficits expected to run over the next 2 to 3 years. Primary budget surpluses from next year onwards, that has a large impact because that flows through to, for instance, government's debt requirements, so their financing requirements, and it makes things in our view look somewhat more positive than they are. Not that there isn't reason to be positive. I just think that at this stage the numbers are a lot more optimistic on the revenue side and conservative on the expenditure side than what we've seen in the past, and that they're likely to stick to.
So in closing, Robert, give us your take on the debt situation.
So fiscal sustainability has been a major concern and still is. The big challenge now is if these forecasts don't materialize, we run the risk of actually increasing debt much faster than what is anticipated. That has major consequences, particularly if we look at things like the bond market, where, if we're expecting less issuances and we're getting more, it has a big impact on pricing, which has an impact of government's cost of funding as well. And that also then feeds through again into how much money they need to borrow. And so that's why, the forecasts, I think if they're too optimistic, we run the risk of having large knock-on effects. And I mean, fiscal sustainability is still a major challenge for us, where we're seeing, debt to GDP at around the 70% mark, just over 70% of GDP. I do think, however, that there might be some positives there. The government's nominal GDP forecasts look a bit conservative as well, and so that might make these numbers look a bit better. But the big challenge is that we are still issuing a lot of debt. Government is also now running into a period where a lot of the debt that financed the expenditure over the last 10 years is starting to fall due. And so in addition to borrowing to meet their current financing requirements, they also need to borrow some extra cash to redeem the bonds as and when they fall due over the next 5 years.
While Namibia and its cities are seen as one of the cleanest countries in Africa, plastic pollution is a big problem. Therefore, it's up to each of us to do what we can to reduce the use of plastic, especially single-use plastic bags. At Liberty Life Namibia, we've taken the decision to turn all our old branding items into reusable shopping bags. It's a way in which we can drive sustainability and look after our most important stakeholder, our environment. If you also believe in sustainability and would like more information, please get in touch. Liberty Life Namibia. In it with you.
Earlier in the program, we showed you Business 7's front page, which is all about Namibia's very, very important geographical location and how it can be exploited to boost economic growth in the country. Now, Dr. Frans Cronje, a very well-known political analyst and a strategist in South Africa, recently hosted or attended a breakfast meeting hosted by Cirrus Capital in Windhoek. We took this following clip out of his speech. It's all about Namibia luring companies from South Africa to set up base in the country.
As South Africa's neighbour, that your neighbour is no longer able to sustain, let alone expand by much, the investment it already holds. It's not a question of taking it away from them, just can't cling on to the stuff. And this is a dilemma for any major firm with interest in the sub-region. South Africa was the de facto place to go and domicile your company. You have no choice but to stick in the region, given the consumer data alone that I've quoted for you, many companies. So it remains an essential market. ESG concerns and the like make it bigger brand risk than ever before to go and set up shop in a fundamentally undemocratic society. And more than 20, we'll get to this a bit later, more than 20 African states now play host to internal armed conflicts, about half to a third of these involving the Islamic State. So from a security perspective, there are problems. So where are you going to go if you want to be here? I'm going to deal with all of the security things, the jihadism and the sub-region, all of that in a moment. Safe to say that none of these problems apply to you here in Namibia. And your ability to domicile companies and attract skills is therefore very great. And that sense that we shouldn't really compete too harshly with some of our regional partners. I mean, you can see it the other way too, that if you don't, the skills are going to be lost to the continent. They're going to go to America and Asia and Europe and the Middle East. So you'd be doing the region and the continent a great favor by trying to draw some of these groups in. And you don't need to do a lot of that for the impact here to be immense. Your budget is 70 billion Namibian dollars, 4 or 5 billion American, 6% equivalent of South Africa's annual receipts from corporate income tax and VAT. If you take 10%, just on paper, 10% of corporate activity out of South Africa and domicile it here with the skills, the effect will be that you at least double your annual tax receipts, you probably triple them, and you trigger a construction and spending boom that will drive your unemployment rate, which I'll talk about later, almost very soon, down to near zero. And you're doing the continent and the region a great favor.
Every day, you make choices that make you legendary. Journey together with us on the path to securing your legacy as a member of the League of Legends. With the Select Platinum Bundle Fee Premium Bank offering, you will access tools that will enable you to thrive. If you earn 850,000 Namibian dollars per annum or more, you can apply for this offering today. via bankventure.com.na for only 447 Namibian dollars per month. Bank Venture, a member of Capricorn Group.
That's it for this week's Business 7. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll meet you again next week.
You can have one or the other. It's not something that we at RMB like to say. So when faced with the conundrum of net profit or net zero, we say, why not both?
With the right people, it's possible. Commercial success or community success?
We like people who ask that question. Why not both?
Environment or investment? With our diverse talents, why not both?
In this changing business landscape, we find ourselves asking more and more how best to help our clients. Traditional values
or innovative ideas?
And the answer always is, why not both?
Connection. It's in the human touch, the feeling of belonging. It inspires us and empowers us, creates clarity from complexity. It starts new conversations, unlocks the power of advice, and makes an impact on your life. At Alex Forbes, we pioneer insight to provide you with advice that connects your decisions of today to your impact tomorrow.
While Namibia and its cities are seen as one of the cleanest countries in Africa, plastic pollution is a big problem. Therefore, it's up to each of us to do what we can to reduce the use of plastic, especially single-use plastic bags. At Liberty Life Namibia, we've taken the decision to turn all our old branding items into reusable shopping bags. It's a way in which we can drive sustainability and look after our most important stakeholder, our environment. If you also believe in sustainability and would like more information, please get in touch. Liberty Life Namibia. In it with you.
In Business 7, you get the latest news on current economic, financial, and business matters in Namibia. The bi-weekly printed edition features informative graphics, articles, and in-depth analysis of burning issues, in a way that caters for ordinary Namibians and business connoisseurs alike. We crunch the numbers that matter, decipher statistics that shape Namibian lives, discuss smart money, and explore the impact of global development locally. Money makes the world go round, so catch our printed edition in the Namibian Sun, Republican, Algemene Zeitung on a bi-weekly cycle.
You can have one or the other. It's not something that we at RMB like to say. So when faced with the conundrum of net profit or net zero, we say, why not both?
With the right people, it's possible. Commercial success or community success?
We like people who ask that question. Why not both?
Environment or investment? With our diverse talents, why not both?
In this changing business landscape, we find ourselves asking more and more how best to help our clients. Traditional values
or innovative ideas?
And the answer always is, why not both?